Maxey from outside. Sixers lead, courtesy of Tyrese Maxey.
Hit deep to left field. Going back is LoCastro. It is gone!
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Beef Up Front podcast. Your host, Ryan Coyle, as always, continuing on today with our 2025 college football preview series. If you haven't seen them already, if you missed them, head over to the YouTube page at Pick Swap Media. We got episodes out so far on an SEC team in Oklahoma, a Big Ten team in Michigan, and an ACC team in Clemson. Today, we will round out the Power Four conferences, going with Texas Tech as our first preview out of the Big 12, and we'll circle back over to the SEC, Big 10, ACC, back to the Big 12, try to hit on some of the, the big dogs from each of those conferences, and then we'll primarily focus down the stretch on those top SEC and Big 10 teams as we get closer and closer to the season. So far, Clemson, I think, is the only real national title contender that we've previewed. But, people are probably like, Texas Tech football, why dive into that? If you haven't been paying that much attention this offseason, this is one of the most fascinating programs, not just in the Big 12, but all of the country. They had a huge infusion of NIL money this offseason from a former, an alumni, a booster. They retained basically their entire roster. They added so many key pieces through the portal. I saw it was reported they're like second or third roster spending-wise, kind of the projection out there for NIL this season. That's pretty insane for Texas Tech. I saw they had to overpay, give some players a little bit more money than they might have actually been worth to come to Texas Tech over, like an Alabama or an Ohio State. But it's kind of cool. I think this is a nice part of the NIL kind of revenue sharing, whatever you want to call it, being able to pay these players and, dedicated alumni trying to kind of expand their program. Texas Tech has been pretty mediocre. They had some 8-4s. They had Patrick Mahomes. They never really got anywhere with him. I think, Joey McGuire, the head coach, and this, team of boosters is really looking to help take this program kind of to the next level and compete for a Big 12 championship this year, which would get them into the playoff. And, anything kind of is possible from there. We saw Arizona State projected to finish last in the Big 12 last year, come out of nowhere, win the conference, go to the playoff, and give Texas a real game in the playoffs. So can Texas Tech do that this year? We're going to talk about that and more. So as always, with all our episodes, we'll preview, we'll talk about the head coach a little bit, 2024 recap last season, talk about the offense, talk about the defense, and then, give my schedule prediction along with some potential gambling picks from our friends over at DraftKings Sports. So started off at the top with the head coach running the show, Joey McGuire, been the head coach here since 2022. Only has a 23-16 record, but he's gone above 500 in league play every year. That was something that they struggled to do before he was there. He's gone 8-5, 7-6, and 8-5. And I think, the fan base, alumni, those NIL boosters are looking for improvement this year. 8-5 is a solid year, but I think 9-3 is kind of the expectation with potentially a ceiling of like a 10-2. Go compete for a Big 12 title. I think that Big 12 is wide open. There's about 5 or 6 teams at the top there. We'll probably touch on all of them, between Texas Tech, between Baylor, between Iowa State, Arizona State, Kansas State. Those are probably the teams mainly kind of in the mix there to win the Big 12 and just, find your way to the title game. You win that, you get your auto berth in. I think that's kind of the expectations and the goal for Texas Tech to be at least in that conversation, in that discussion this year. But this is a program that looks like it's certainly on the rise, but a lot of pressure on Joey McGuire this year. I think if he goes anything less than, last year's 8-5, that there's a good chance he's on his way out. And you're looking to bring in a new coach because with all this money, you're going to have a ton of money to pay a new coach. I think it's an attractive job, and they see all the money that they're dedicating to the facilities, to the players. That's going to be an attractive job if it opens up. So Joey McGuire's got a lot of pressure on him going into this year, a former assistant at Baylor and a long-time really successful high school coach in Texas high school football. So a big time year potentially coming for Joey McGuire, but a lot of pressure on him as well as he enters year, 22, 23, 24, as he enters year 4. at Texas Tech. So looking forward to seeing what Joey McGuire could do with this squad. When you look back at 2024 for Texas Tech, they beat Abilene Christian in the season opener 52-51. And I think that game was a perfect indicator of the season that they were going to have ahead, because it was as inconsistent as you could get. I think inconsistent was probably the main word I would use to sum up the Texas Tech season last year. You start off beating an FCS school 52-51 in overtime, but then you beat both Arizona State and Iowa State, who both played in the Big 12 title game, but you lose to Baylor and Colorado by double digits. It was kind of just like every week what team was going to show up. They need to be more consistent this year if they want to reach their goals, if they want to reach their ceiling. They looked really good at some points, but outmatched other points. They scored 50 points 4 different times last year, but they also allowed 30 or more 7 different times. So it was a team that had a lot of firepower on offense, and when the offense was clicking, they were one of the best groups, not just in the Big 12, but in the entire country. But that defense was leaky. That defense gave up a lot of big plays, was very vulnerable to the explosive play last year, to giving up a lot of points, allowed 30 or more, as I said, 7 different times. Joey McGuire's got a defensive background. That's something that certainly has to be cleaned up this season. They have to be better on that side of the ball to reach their ceiling. They lost their running back, Taj Brooks, probably the best running back in school history. He ran for 1,500 yards and 17 touchdowns last season, was the all-time leading rusher in program history as well. So you have him going out the door. Obviously, that's a big hole. Outside of that, though, outside of Taj Brooks leaving, the all-time leading rusher in program history, obviously a big loss there. But outside of that, every starter from last year's team returns, and they have arguably the number 1 portal class in the entire country thanks to this infusion of NIL money. And also with that infusion of NIL money, you're able to return those players as well from the previous team last year. So being able to retain and go get guys out of the portal, Texas Tech went and used their money really well. Deion Sanders even said it at the Big 12 Media Days. He said, my guy Joey's got some money. Let me get some of that money now. So even more pressure, I think, on Joey McGuire going into this year with this really expensive roster. Expectations should be as high as ever, I think, for a Texas Tech football program. All right, let's transition over now to the offense and look ahead to this year. As I said, they lost running back Taj Brooks from last year, the all-time leading rusher in program history. Outside of that, though, returned 10 starters from last year's team, including their quarterback Baron Morton, who had 4 games last season with over 300 passing yards, threw for 3,300 yards in the season. Look for him to be one of the top Big 12 quarterbacks in the nation. As I said, this was a team that put up 50 or more points in 4 different games this year, put up 30 on numerous occasions, 40 5 different times. So it's a team that could really light up the scoreboard last year. The defense was the Achilles heel, but with Baron Morton back, with a lot of continuity returning on that offense, our veteran offensive line, expectations should be that this offense, takes it to even another level, if not just remain at the steady level that it was last year, where it averaged 38 points per game and 463 yards per game. And that was with Morton slinging the rock back there. So look for this Texas Tech offense to be really exciting, one of the best groups in the country. When you look to how do they kind of replace Brooks, I think they might go with even more pass-heavy attack, but they bring in USC transfer running back Quentin Joyner. Look for him to make some noise with Brooks. Out of the fold, there's a lot of carries. There's a lot of yards to be made up for. So look for Quentin Joyner to potentially be one of the breakout players in the country this year and fill that role. It's a very friendly offensive system. As we said, 38 points per game, 463 yards per game. It was a team that was able to really light it up. So without a true number 1 receiver, though, I think on this team, I expect to see kind of a balanced passing game with the return of, a few key players from last year's team that were catching passes from Morton. But then also they added some guys in the portal. They added a player from the MAC. They added a tight end out of the portal. It's a team that I think isn't going to have that true number 1, that true alpha, but you're going to have, a handful of guys that have 45 catches, 700 yards, and 5 touchdowns. You're going to have like 3 or 4 of those guys, and Morton, as the veteran quarterback that he is really going to spread the football around. So also reading up on this, Joey McGuire has been on record, has stated this is the best offensive line that he thinks he's had since he's gotten to Texas Tech, and he thinks there's 7 to 8 deep. He has 7 to 8 players that he could feel confident starting any week. So whenever you're able to go into a season, go into a game, and you have your solidified starting 5 offensive linemen, one of those guys go down, you don't really think you're going to a backup when you're 7 to 8 deep. You're just an extension of a starting lineup. So you have a veteran quarterback coming back, a stable of pass catchers with experience, and a veteran offensive line. No reason this offense should take a step back. Averaged 38 points per game and 463 yards per game last year. I think that number could be over 40 points per game and closer to 500 yards per game. Should be one of the most explosive offenses in the entire country this upcoming season. Now we go to the side of the ball that I think has the most pressure on them out of any side of the ball on this team. And I know it's offense, but then you include the special teams as well. But the defense, this is where I think determines the ceiling for this team. As long as Morton stays healthy on the offensive end, I think they have enough depth and quality players that they're going to be able to put up points. And they're going to be able to outscore teams. But can Texas Tech get stops when it matters most? Can they get off the field on third down? I think that's ultimately going to determine how good this team is. As I said at the beginning, McGuire's got a defensive background, so he should get a lot of flack if he doesn't figure it out this year, if he doesn't get this defense, turn around and be one of the top half units in the Big 12. You don't have to be the top unit, but be in that top 5 to 6 range, and you're kind of going to be in the mix there for a 9-3, 10-2 season. I think return all 11 starters from last year's defense. So that's not saying that all 11 of these guys are going to start, but all 11 starters, from the base defense last season are back for this team. So they're loaded with experience. But also that means, they had some games last year where they got picked apart, where they got exposed. That unit needs to improve, but you would expect them to improve with the returning kind of experience and continuity. They do have a new DC in town. Sheil Wood comes in from Houston. He was the Houston DC last year. He's going to be running a 3-4, switching up the scheme a little bit on the defense to shake things up. Defense only had 21 sacks last season for Texas Tech. That's a number that certainly needs to improve. The Big 12 has never really been known for defense, never been really known for their pass rush, but that number's got to be 30 plus. I think if they're looking to contend for a Big 12 title this year, they have to be able to get after the quarterback more. This is a conference that has a lot of quarterbacks with experience, some really good quarterbacks. You'll get Avery Johnson, you'll get Jalen Daniels, you'll get Rocco Beck. There's a lot of top dogs that you're going to have to get through in this conference to get to where you want to be. And that defensive line needs to step up and improve in a big way this upcoming season. Defense gave up 34.8 points per game last year. That was their most since 2022. So this is a 2020 TOO. So this is a defense that I think has taken a step back over the past couple of years. They need to really improve this year, as I've said a few times so far. Added 5 defensive linemen in the portal, including defensive tackle Lee Hunter from UCF. He's a guy that is generating some NFL draft buzz, as well as Stanford defensive end David Bailey, 2 guys that are expected to be an infusion of talent on that defensive line for Texas Tech. Read it up on the Phil Steele magazine as I do all kind of my previews. The scouts, according to the magazine, we're telling McGuire that they believe that this is a top 5 defensive line in the entire country. So it is a defense that went out and in the portal and they saw, only 21 sacks last season. That's something that we really have to improve. So they go out, they put their money where their mouth is. And it's a group that not only with the returning experience on this team, but adding the talent from the portal should definitely take a step up. The linebacker group returns a lot of experience too. As we said, all 11 starters are back. They got guys back from last year, some of their top tacklers. The DB room return, everyone notable from last year, added some more talent through the portal too. So every kind of spot on this roster added some key guys through the portal, and they went out and used their money well. It's not like they just threw $10 million at a quarterback or $10 million at a receiver. They really used that NIL money well. They added depth across the board, and this defense should take a step up, allowing 34.8 points per game last year, giving up 30 or more in 7 different games. It could have been worse, but it couldn't have been much worse. So defensive side of the ball has to improve for this Texas Tech team to take it to another level. All right, let's get into a schedule prediction now. The over-under on the win total over at DraftKings. I said what I think this team is, kind of a 9-3, 10-2 in that mix if all things go right. Vegas kind of agrees right there with me. Over-under is 8.5 with -140 to the over. So Vegas likes, Texas Tech to win at least 9 games here, plus 120 to the under. I think the under could be in the play if that defense doesn't come to play. If that defense doesn't take that next step. But I have faith that they are going to step it up a little bit this year. 101 to win the Natty. I don't really think worth the stab there. Plus 600 to win the Big 12, though. I think they could certainly be in the mix for a title spot. That's the 4th best odds there in the Big 12. Plus 450 to make the playoff. Another kind of longer shot there. And -700 to miss it. So, heavily favored to miss the playoffs, but I think it's going to be a wide open Big 12 full of surprises. Would not surprise me at all if Texas Tech finds himself in the conference title game by year's end. Let's run through this schedule game by game. Open up with Arkansas Pine Bluff. Give them a W there. Kent State, a W there. Easily should start 2-0. But last year they started out slow out of the gate with that Abilene Christian game, only beating them 52-51. It was a bit of a head scratching game in overtime. I think they probably learned their lesson from that and come out ready week 1 this year. Oregon State should be an interesting team this year. Malik Murphy transferred out there. It won't be a cupcake game, but I like Texas Tech to start 3-0. First Big 12 game of the year, they travel to Utah. Not a cupcake at all there. I'll give them their first loss of the season. At Houston, I think it's going to be a tough game. I really like Willie Fritz, the head coach. Connor Wegman transfers in there. I think Houston could surprise some people this year. Not say be the Arizona State of last year, but make some noise and maybe win 7 or 8 games when many people are kind of picking them to be a 4 or 5 win team, I think, going into the year. But I will give Texas Tech the win there. I think if Texas Tech's going to take that next leap as a program, that's a game that you got to win. Then they host Kansas, give them a win in that one. Kansas, I expect to bounce back. Had a slow start last year, but finished strong. But I like Texas Tech to get that one at home. Then they go to Arizona State. Keep in mind, Texas Tech did beat Arizona State last year, so they're not going to catch them by surprise this year, though. I think going to Arizona State will be a tough one. Sam Levitt back. I expect them to be back in the mix for a Big 12 title. I'm going to give Arizona State to win there, so Texas Tech their second loss. And they host OK State, which is looking to probably finish last in the conference. I'll give them a win there. At Kansas State, a loss. I think they probably go to the 3 teams I would put above them to win the Big 12. Utah, Arizona State, and Kansas State. I would probably put a peg above Texas Tech right now, and they have to play all 3 of those teams on the road, which is unfortunate for them. So I'm going to give them a loss at Kansas State there. If they're able to get one of those games at Arizona State, at K-State, or at Utah, that's huge for the season and potentially get into double-digit wins. But I give them a loss there. Host BYU, will give them a win there. Host UCF, I'll give them a win there. I expect both those teams to have down seasons this year. And at West Virginia. West Virginia is a mystery team to me this year. Don't know what to make of them. Rich Rod's a really good coach, but I think it might take a little bit of time to get back running down there at West Virginia. But I'll give Texas Tech a win there. So 3 losses at Utah, at Arizona State, at Kansas State, still has them finishing with a 9-3 record. That's certainly a step up. That gives you in the conversation and potentially go to that Big 12 title game. I think to get to that Big 12 title game, though, as I said, you'll have to win one of those games against Utah, Arizona State, in case I could see this one definitely come down to some tiebreakers. But in this scenario, they're probably on the outside looking in, but they would cash the over on their win total. This is one that I'm not going to be betting because there are a few swing games. Like at Houston, I could see them dropping, if things don't go right. Kansas, what do they look like this year? Oregon State even, is going to be a feisty team. There's a few swing games here where I don't have them going way over and you're paying some juice. So it's one that I'm going to stay away from, but I do have them going 9-3. I think that ultimately will not be good enough to make the playoff. They'll to make the conference title game, obviously not make the playoff in that scenario, but the program definitely headed on the right trajectory. People seeing this team go 9-3, improving, players getting paid, coaches getting paid. It's going to be an attractive program to go to over the next few years. And, hopefully for Texas Tech fans, they can continue to build that. So that'll wrap up our Texas Tech episode here. First episode of the Big 12 teams. We're going to go over to the SEC next. I'm going to talk about the South Carolina Gamecocks in my next one, a team I've been talking a lot about this offseason over on Fox Sports The Gambler. Lenore Sellers, Shane Beamer, looking for a big year out of that quarterback head coach duo. Looking forward to seeing what they bring to the table. But keep it locked here on Pick Swap Media. Please like, subscribe, and we'll be talking to you next week.